Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I call the meeting to order. I'm Councillor Ian Edwards. I'm Chairman of the Central and South Planning Committee. Very warm welcome to you all, members of the public who have come out this evening, and also anybody who may be following us on our YouTube channel. That is also to let you know that this meeting is being captured and shown on YouTube. It's there forever. You can always come back and look at it. The camera's just ahead and points this way, so members in the gallery aren't captured. However, anybody who comes forward to address the committee as a petitioner, they will be recorded on YouTube. Okay, fire alarms. We're not expecting one this evening, so if it does sound, we will be leaving the building. Best way out is the way you came in, through those double doors off to your right-hand side, my left. We will be going with you, so don't worry. We'll take you down through the doors opposite on the left-hand side and down the spiral staircase outside the building. If that's blocked for any reason, there are fire exits behind us. Mobiles and tablets. Can I please ask everybody to make sure their mobile phones and tablets are turned to silent? And members of the public, residents, there are feedback forms that we invite you to complete. Your comments are submitted to the Democratic Services, not to me, and that helps us improve the way we run the meetings. Okay, there's a little bit about a lot of people around the table. Who are they? What are they doing? How's the committee run? The planning committee is made up of councillors, members of the council, and they are voting members of the committee. And as chairman, I vote in the event there being a tie. Now, let me introduce those members to you. I'll start on my far left-hand side. Councillor Beera, Councillor Dillon and Councillor Duncan. On my far right-hand side, Councillor Tutwell, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Brightman, Councillor Ahmed Walana and Councillor Chamdal. As I say, they're the voting members. The other people around the table are officers of the council, and they are here to assist the committee. On our my far left-hand side, Kerry Munro is our planning lawyer, legal advice. Liz Penny is clerking in the meeting. Noel Kelly is the planning services manager and will give advice on planning issues. Meg Harani is also a planning officer and will be presenting each case, but can also give us some advice. A very experienced guy. And Alan Tilley is an officer with highways experience and will give us expert advice on highways should we need them. We do have petitions this evening. And as we get to those points, I will talk the petitioners through it. There's nothing to worry. And there's a little bit about speaking rights. Although we're meeting in public, any member of the public can come here and attend the planning committee. There are no general speaking rights. So I can't accept comments. The committee cannot accept comments from any members of the public in attendance, other than those that are speaking as a petitioner or the agent or applicant in response to a petition. Okay, so I do ask that comments are not made from the floor, please. Part 1 and Part 2, we'll speak about that as we march through the early part of the agenda very quickly. Briefly, Part 1 are all the planning applications that are discussed in public. They're the bits that you're generally interested in. Part 2 are the matters of planning enforcement that are discussed in private. And the reason we discuss those in private is because it can end up in enforcement actions. However, the subject matter and the decision of the committee are published. There is a break between Part 1 and Part 2, and if any member of the public is still here at the end of Part 1, we at that point invite them to leave, and we also break the YouTube link. So that's where we get on. So that's a bit about Part 1 and Part 2, which we will march through as we get through the agenda. So that's all my preliminary introduction. We will now very speedily go through the first 5 agenda items. Number 1, apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Number 2, declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. Colleagues, any additional? None? Thank you. Number 3, to sign and receive the minutes of the previous meeting dated the 2nd of October. Hold on 1 second.
Sorry, just before we agree them, I was asked by the clerk from the last meeting, the petition has been in touch since we published the agenda, just asking for a very, very small change to the minutes in relation to the item on Church Road, just asking if we could state in the minutes that the petitioner agreed with all the non-standard reasons given in the planning officer's report. So we just want to add that one sentence.
With that change on the minutes acceptable, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Matters that have been notified in advance or urgent, there are none, and item 5 is to declare that there are items of business in part 1 and part 2. So we now get into the bit that everybody is really interested in, which is the actual planning applications. Item 6, number 47, Fairfield Road. Mr. Ronnie.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to 47 Fairfield Road, which is a detached building, 2 stories in height, and situated at the junction of Fairfield Road and Harefield Road. The proposal is for the demolition of this dwelling and the erection of a 3-storey building to provide 6 3-bed flats. If I can just point members to the pages 16 and 17, members will note that we had a considerable number of replies to the consultation and a petition, and the comments or the objections that were received are set out in some detail on pages 16 and 17. Internal comments are also set out, starting at page 17 and going on to 21. They include comments from the Conservation Officer and the Highways Officer, and the Conservation Officer's comments are particularly relevant. The proposal is to provide a brand new building on the site, 3 stories in height, with a flat roof, and there are a number of issues which have arisen and which are reflected in the reasons for refusal. The first issue is the principle of the development, and members will know that the Council has an emerging policy, DMH4, which restricts the number of redevelopments to flatted development in a particular road to 10% of that road. And in this particular case, Fairfield Road has had a considerable number of developments over the years, resulting in quite a large number of flatted developments, and has now exceeded the 10% set out in the policy DMH4. So in principle, a flatted development on this site is considered unacceptable. If I can talk through the plans, this is the existing building and this is the proposed building, and I will show you a plan which has the two together. If I can get to it. Oops. There we are. So you can see from that the issues that arise. If I can go to the layout plan, the first issue is the siting of the development and its overall footprint. This is a site which is situated at the junction of Fairfield Road and Harefield Road, and there is considerable spacing to the sides of the properties. And with the new development, this is virtually filled in, leaving a 1 metre gap to the Harefield Road frontage, which your officers consider is not sufficient to reflect the spacing of development within the area, and that's reflected in reason 2. If I can turn to the overall design of the building, you'll see that the current properties are generally 1950s 2-storey pitch roof dwellings, and this is not reflected in the design of the new building, which is a neo-Georgian 3-storey flat roof building, and so it's the overall size, scale and bulk and design of the building which is considered unacceptable. There are issues about the length that the building projects within the site to the rear of the adjoining property at 45, and the impact that that has on that property. And there are issues about the provision of parking, which is not reflected in the standards that the council require. So with all those reasons, it is recommended for refusal. There are also issues about the non-provision of a lift within the building, which is required for any building above 2 stories. And so for those reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. If I can just bring members' attention to the addendum, we have received an appeal against the non-determination of this this application within the 8 weeks statutory period, and therefore the recommendation has changed slightly to reflect that. If I can just continue with the plans. That's the existing site, and you can see the substantial amount of space to, this is the Fairfield Road frontage, you can see the spacing of development, and that's the proposed, and you can see that the space that's left at the side on the Fairfield Road frontage. The site is on an elevated site, so it is higher than the roads. Both roads have Fairfield and Harefield Road. That's the rear of the site and the adjoining property. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you much, Mr. Harney. Do we have Ms. Alani, the petitioner, present? You wish to speak? If you'd like to come forward, please. Either of the chairs. Before you will see a microphone, and to the front edge there is a button, and that's a toggle on off microphone button. When you toggle it on, the lights light up. It's important that you use the microphone, not only so that we can hear, but also so that your voice is captured and the petition is captured on YouTube. Okay? You will have 5 minutes speaking time, and we assist you with the timing with the lights. You have 4 minutes with the green light, 1 with the amber, and when it comes to the 5 minutes, the red light will show, and at that point I need to draw you to a close. And I am pretty insistent on that point, to be fair to everybody who has the same speaking time. Okay? So at your own convenience, when you wish to start, we will start. Please provide your petition.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, ladies, gentlemen, residents. So I'm a resident at number 45 Fairfield Road, which is the adjacent property just next to number 47, and submitted the petition on behalf of the residents that was dropped off by hand to the council. We collected in one day 37 signatures against the planning application that has been submitted. The reason why I wanted to speak was just to sort of add a bit of background and some of the sentiment behind what's been proposed. So I've lived at 45 Fairfield for approximately 5 years with my family. I've lived in the Borough of Hillingdon my whole life, so in excess of 30 years, without disclosing my age. And basically, the reason why we chose to move to Fairfield Road was because it's a beautiful street. It's one of the most affluent roads in the area, and it's full of lovely family homes and lovely families. It took us about 10 years looking for that property to find it, and when we did, obviously we were elated when we moved in. Now, Fairfield Road is an interesting plot because there are some smaller properties and some larger family dwellings, and as has been mentioned in the meeting, a number of developments that have taken place over the years. It's quite packed with flats at the moment, and actually it's a shame because the ones that have been done, although they're not wholly unsympathetic as I feel this one is to the character of the street, it is rather congested, and it's a bit of it's confused the message of the street a little bit, and I just think that this would be far more detrimental. There are two streams of thought basically that I wanted to just articulate this evening. One is the community and the residents' interest, and the other is a personal interest. I've been through the extensive report, which has a lot of self-explanatory reasons and the non-standard refusals or suggestions to revoke the planning application. But just to reiterate a few, the road is incredibly congested, particularly down the end where Harefield and Fairfield Road are joined. Harefield Road is not a broad street. It's not as broad as Fairfield. There are some resident parking spaces, but there are also business parking spaces, and typically the houses that exist, our houses, we tend to keep our cars in our driveways, but already at the weekend it's very hard to turn onto a blind corner between Harefield and Fairfield Road. There used to be a mirror where you could see the traffic coming. Now it's absolutely blind. That was taken down. There are buses that go down that road. There are children on their way into school, and there are local residents that walk into Uxbridge town centre. And I think to have a large-scale development with sort of 6 residential units and cars coming in and out of that would just add to the risk on the road. In addition to that, sorry, I'm just checking my notes. Yeah, I think it's already been covered. The proposed development is incredibly unsightly. You know, it doesn't have any charm to it. It's not sympathetic to the character of the properties. And it's disappointing to see that, particularly on a row from number 47 to about halfway up Fairfield Road, these are all houses that are quite attractive to look at. It's elevated, as was mentioned, so it's visible from all vantage points of Harefield and Fairfield Road, and the houses on Harefield Road that would look directly across the road at it, I think would be negatively impacted. On a personal level, our neighbours who lived at number 47 lived at that house for 19 years, almost 20 years, and it was their family home. When they went through the process of looking to relocate, they were very careful to try and find a family that would love the house as much as they did. Now, it's unfortunate they were not aware at the time that they sold the house the intention to develop it. The current owner of number 47 has not lived in that house for one day. He's currently rented the property to a family who's just recently occupied the property, and he's not familiar with the neighbourhood, with the neighbours, with the community sense, and with the people that are very proud of the street. Us as a family ourselves, and when Tim was living in that house, we had been approached by a developer about 3 or 4 years ago who offered a handsome premium to sell the plot, but we didn't feel that it was right. You know, our intention was to live in it as a family home, as is most of the people who live on Fairfield Road. When I went door knocking and people answered the doors to sign the petitions, there's an incredible amount of people that have lived on this street for sort of over 20, 30 years. And the feeling was that the council had made a commitment that Fairfield Road had been developed to its full capacity, and it was, I think, a few people were very vocal about how they were sort of heartbroken. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I must draw
Sorry,
you
I've
to,
just seen it.
No,
Yeah.
that's fine. I just draw you to a close at that point.
Sure.
Colleagues, are there any questions you wish to ask the petitioner of clarification? Thank you very much. Can I invite you to turn the microphone off and then return to the seats? Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Do we have the applicant, Mr. Kakaria, here, or the agent, Mr. Patel? Nobody wish to speak. Councillor Graham, you've indicated that you wish to address the committee. If you'd like to come forward, although you are familiar with addressing the committee, for members of the public, councillors are entitled to speak on matters relating to their own ward, and in this case they have a 3-minute speaking time. Okay, so we'll just adjust the clock. And your pleadings.
Good evening, Chairman, committee members and officers. I'm Councillor Ray Graham, Uxbridge North Ward, and I'm here to support the petitioners and draw the committee's attention to the numerous objections as listed in the report on this application. I will keep my comments brief, but nonetheless pertinent. The case officer's report clearly and thoroughly emphasises that for many reasons this proposed development does not harmonise with the street scene, particularly as regards the Hillingdon local plan in this defined development area, and if allowed to proceed would lead to the total demolition of the existing on-site building, which is of character. Also, the non-standard reasons for refusal refer to non-compliance with various strategic plans as set out. Furthermore, and if permitted, the building would amount to an incongruous addition to the street scene, as has been said, and would push the multiple development of single-family homes into flats along Fairfield Road, if allowed, to an unacceptable level. The Highways Officer's comments, as detailed in the report, are pertinent as regards the lack of on-site residence and visitors' parking provision, and therefore a foreseen increase in traffic generation leading to obvious problems in the surrounding area. Finally, I would add that a development on this scale would, as has been said, undoubtedly have an overbearing effect on the adjoining property number 45 Fairfield Road, and to some extent on the facing properties in Harefield Road. In conclusion, therefore, I hope that the committee will support the case officer's recommendation and refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any questions at all, colleagues? No, thank you. I invite you to turn the microphone off. Before I open this for discussion, there are just two issues that I picked up coming out from the petition that aren't included in the refusal reasons. The first one is congestion. The petition commented that the junction is already congested, and the belief that allowing this flatted development would exacerbate that and potentially give rise to public safety issue. So I'd invite Mr. Tilley to comment on that one. And the second was the impact on the outlook to the properties in Harefield Road opposite the flank wall to this proposed development, and the detriment caused to that. Neither of those are picked up as refusal reasons, and I'd invite officers to comment on each of those. First of all, Mr. Tilley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Committee. Fairfield Road, the application site is on the junction of Fairfield Road with Harefield Road. Harefield Road forms part of the Borough's classified road network and is a bus route. The Fairfield Road and Harefield Road are both within a parking management scheme. Along Harefield Road, there is on-street parking, which reduces the carriageway width. Vehicles approaching in opposite directions have to give way to one another. And of course, Harefield Road provides access to the town centre from Park Road to the north. So it is considered that the additional traffic generated by this development, not least the demand for further on-street car parking along a road that already has a parking management scheme, would give rise to transport highway concerns.
Thank you. Can you comment about the impact on the junction itself, that the additional traffic generated by this proposed development would exacerbate highway safety because of the tightness of the junction and the limited visibility? That was the point that was made by the petitioner that I believe we need some assistance with, please.
The junction of Fairfield Road and Harefield Road is protected by double yellow lines to give vehicles emerging from Fairfield Road adequate visibility. However, the new development would be occupied by families who we would expect to own maybe 1-2 vehicles, and those would of course be additional vehicles on the road network over and above those cars already used by the occupants of the dwelling.
And is that additional number of cars sufficient to arrive at a refusal reason?
The additional number of cars would not necessarily give rise to road safety concerns. It would, however, give rise to further delay at that junction, which you might interpret to be drivers get more impatient and take greater risks. But I think the main concern would be the impact upon capacity.
You are carefully hedging your bets on whether or not this is a refusal reason. You're saying that there is detriment, there is additional congestion, but is that sufficient to amount to a refusal reason?
My highway concerns are with regard to car parking stress primarily, not so much traffic generation, trip generation, but highway concerns with regards to parking.
So the answer, if I may, you saying no then?
There are highway concerns, but they relate to car parking stress primarily.
Fine. And that is the issue of the car parking spaces. The petitioner was talking about, though, because there are more cars from this plot of land now, it is going to cause a problem at the junction, which is a highway safety. And what I'm teasing from you is whether that in itself is a refusal reason, or whether you are of the opinion that there is insufficient number of additional traffic generated such that we couldn't sustain that as a refusal reason.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be clear. We would not be able to refuse this planning application on grounds of highway capacity or road safety.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That is helpful. If I could turn now to Mr. Harani or Mr. Kelly, and that is regarding the outlook of the properties in Fairfield Road facing this large 3-storey flank wall, which is elevated in itself above the road level.
Thank you, Chairman. We do have certain standards that set out the flank wall to window distances. The properties that would be affected are those that are fronting onto Fairfield Road opposite the site, rather than any properties that are on Fairfield Road itself. And I think that given the distances, that we're unlikely to win any appeals in terms of outlook to those residents.
Thank you. And is there any impact at all on light?
No, we've said that in the report said that there's no impact on light. It's the impact on number 45 in terms of the length that the development goes beyond the back of number 45, and therefore the dominance and the outlook. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Colleagues. Councillor Dill.
Thank you, Chairman. Even when we like a application, you get 6 refusals, and it's difficult to argue those with officers. But this is a development that I don't like. It is overbearing, it's out of character. The additional parking stress would cause, I think, congestion. Flank wall would be out of character, I think, in my personal opinion, even though officers may not. It's wholly inappropriate for the street. I would have no problem supporting the officer's recommendation of a refusal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chamdale, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I quite agree. I don't think we need to go any further than this. The 6 refusal reasons, and I would be happy to second that.
Before we move to the vote, I believe Councillor Duncan, you indicated you might wish to bring out another issue that hadn't been considered.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that is referred to, but only fleetingly, is the fact that this will move the building line for Fairfield Road to within a metre, which is unprecedented. There's no other property in Fairfield Road, and certainly not in this part of it. I don't know if there's anything further up Fairfield Road. I can't recall all the properties, but certainly this is very damaging to the street scene. And I know it's in refusal reason 2, it refers to forward projection of the established building line, but only in that it would result in the loss of an important gap. Well, I think it doesn't only result in the loss of an important gap. I think it actually obtrudes upon a fairly well-observed building line. I mean, the building line is not rigid, and it's not like a terrace or row, but you only have to look at the plan that we have to see that all properties are set back, you know, a distance from the road. There's nothing that comes to within 1 metre of it. So that is starting to obtrude on the whole street scene and damage the character of the street scene as well. So I would ask if you know, other members feel similarly and agree, if that point could be incorporated somehow and strengthened, taken away and agreed with you and myself as lead.
Thank you very much. Councillor.
Hi, I take that point, thank you, Chairman. I take that point from Councillor Duncan. Would that not be covered in refusal reason 1? Where it mentions visual amenities of the street scene in wider area.
If I can just bring in Mr. Kelly here on this point, whether or not we can beef up for refusal reason 2.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that's a valid point. Really, I think ultimately refusal reason 1 and 2. I think refusal reason 1 addresses the issue in terms of the effect of the character, the appearance, not only on Fairfield Road but also on Harefield Road. So I think you could kind of extend it to that. Obviously, the reason 2 includes the issue in terms of the gap. That was a big consideration for officers. There's a substantial increase in the volume of the development adjacent to Harefield Road and in close proximity to Harefield Road. So that formed the basis in terms of how we framed the reasons. But I believe in terms of how you've constructed your point, I think refusal reason 1 and 2 may deal with that.
Could I just say, Chair, one is about the principle of flatted developments. Proposed would give rise to an unacceptable level of flatted development. Yes, I agree it would. It doesn't say anything, and that as a flatted development, it would have a detrimental impact on the character, appearance and visual amenity of the street scene. So except that point, it looks different. It is not a house, it's a flatted development. That's the principle of what it is. I'm talking about the principle of moving a building line, which is like no other. It's unprecedented, it's unique, it moves it forward. And if you establish that, then you're saying, in effect, oh, it's fine if other properties want to build front extensions that put them to within 1 metre. So it's a slightly different point. And the standard reason 2, yes, I agree with all the reasons for refusal. It's not that I'm disagreeing. I'm bringing in another thing, the importance of the building line being moved, because that's a fairly critical thing in any street scene in almost any road in the borough.
Thank you. That point is well made. Mr. Harani.
Thank you, Chairman. As members know, this is sort of development on corner sites is an issue that has arisen on a number of occasions at this committee, and we have some considerable success at appeal on these sites. And the reason for refusal reflects in terms of what the inspectors set out, i.e. the infilling of the space between the road and the building, and also the character of the surrounding street scene, which is that there are spaces between buildings and corner sites are particularly important. There is more space on corner sites than on middle of the road sites, and I think that's reflected on the impact on the character and appearance of the area section, and in particular on page 23, where we talk about how it projects forward on the Harefield Road and how the height and the distance from the boundary impacts on the openness of that corner. So I think we have covered it in the report. If members wish, this is obviously now an appeal. We can ask the appeal officer obviously to beef that up as well on the appeal statements that we would need to make.
If I could just say, Chair, I only make this point because I know if we don't include them in reasons for refusal, we can come unstitched later on.
I would just support you on this one, Councillor Duncan. I'm not going to argue against it. I believe that we can strengthen refusal reason 2. I can think of wording immediately that would address it, but I think there needs to be inclusion here in about detriment to the street scene in Harefield Road. And that, I think, can easily be done. I would suggest we delegate to officers to adjust that refusal reason. I don't believe that in such a simple one of just adding in and detriment to the street scene in Harefield Road, it needs to be signed off by us, if you are in agreement with that. Okay. So we've had it moved and seconded that, subject to a small addition in refusal reason 2 about the impact on the street scene in Harefield Road, is this refusal agreed? That is everybody. Thank you very much. That application is refused.
Sorry, can I just clarify, you wish to see that reason?
No.
Chair and Labour lead? No?
No, there's no need. It's quite a straightforward one. I think we can add in a couple of words here, and I absolutely trust officers to do that. Thank you. Okay, if we may now turn to agenda item 7, please, number 4, Hamilton Road.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to 4 Hamilton Road, which is a semi-detached dwelling situated within the Clayton Way area of special local character, and the application is for a single-storey side and rear extension, and it's for the retention of the extension that has been constructed on site. Planning permission was granted last year for a single-storey side and rear extension, which was of a different design and appearance to what has been constructed on site. And the reason for refusal relates in essence to the appearance and design and use of materials that has occurred on site. So I think it's probably best if I go directly to the plans and the photographs. As you can see, that signifies the area special local character. And these are the existing or pre-existing plans, and then the proposed. In essence, the issues relate to the use of the materials, the projecting element, and that's particularly common there. These are the materials that were used. They have tried to match the existing materials by tinting the brick at the front, but as the conservation officer says, it hasn't been entirely successful, and so the use of the materials is considered unacceptable. Its projection at the roof level forward is considered unacceptable, and those are the adjoining properties and the back garden. There are issues in relation to the retention of this building here in the application that was approved. This was shown as being removed, and therefore it opened up the back of the site, and at this current stage it's still in position, and therefore it adds to the overall bulk and size of the sort of buildings on the site, given that it is situated very close, as you can see, almost attached to the extension that's there. So in essence what you've got is a rear extension which projects 3.6 metres plus the size of that garage, which is another 4.5–5 metres. So you've got a substantial projection to the rear of the building there, and so it's the overall size and scale of that building and its use of materials and design which is the issue. We have received, as members will know, substantial correspondence in the last couple of days from the petitioner. We've tried to eke out the planning merits or the planning considerations within that, and they're set out in the addendum. There are a considerable number of matters which were not considered to be planning considerations, and they aren't set out in the addendum, but the application is recommended for refusal on the grounds set out. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harani. The petitioner, Mr. Richard Wright, present and wish to speak. If you'd like to come forward, sir. Make yourself comfortable either of the chairs. Again, the microphone, there's a button to the front edge. It's a toggle on, toggle off microphone. When it's on, the light will be on. You'll have 5 minutes speaking time. We assist you with the lights, 4 minutes at green, 1 at amber, and when it comes to the red, I will draw you to a close at that point. So if you wish to commence at your own convenience, thank you.
Right, good evening to the Planning Committee members, those in the stalls, and to those of you on YouTube. 5 minutes would not be enough time to put into words and explain the detrimental appearance and flaws that this extension, built at 4 Hamilton Road, has within the London Borough of Hillingdon's Orchard Drive, Clayton Way area of special local character. Through the lack of adherence to the plans as submitted by the applicants, and the lack of observation to the schedule of conditions in size, form and materials used, nor the effect upon some residents and neighbouring properties by this completed build at 4 Hamilton Road, through not even following basic building practices, these effects being clearly apparent when the property is observed in wet weather. As such, a handout of comments, images, captions and plans has been provided to the Planning Committee members to aid in their decision. which will primarily be based upon the report of the planning officer concerned. For the benefit of people in stalls and for those that are viewing on YouTube, I'll give a brief description of the sections in the handouts as supplied to the Planning Committee members for consideration in the making of their decision. Section 1, comments regarding the submitted plans, planning application forms and the planning officer's report. Section 2, comments regarding the schedule of conditions for the granted planning application and examples of the lack of observation that is under consideration. Section 3, comments, images and descriptive examples of pre-area special local character extension finishes for comparison with this newly built extension. Section 4, comments, images and descriptive examples of post-area of special local character extensions and conversion finishes for comparison with this newly built extension. Section 5, comments, images and descriptive examples regarding damage to properties during the build, with concerns of residents regarding some communal services that are shared by neighbours and residents. Section 6, comments regarding this property's designation, images of the agreed ground floor plan and a representation of the ground floor plan as is currently believed to exist for comparison in this extension. Section 7, comments, images and descriptive examples regarding ongoing damage to adjoining and adjacent properties which could have health and safety implications to the occupants of the property at number 4 Hamilton Road and those that are neighbouring. In conclusion, I wish to thank the Planning Committee members for taking the time to consider the points that are raised within the sections of the handout and points that have been raised within the Planning Officer's report, and the opportunity to present these points on behalf of the concerned residents of Hamilton Road. I would like to add, a lot of the points that are in the handout are to do with the coloration of the bricks, etc. I'm disappointed it's in black and white, as the images you put up on your screen just do not convey how bad it is. I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, sir. If that completes your presentation to us. Colleagues, are there any questions at all we wish to ask of the petitioner? Clarification. No, thank you. Sorry, yes, Councillor Duncan.
To ask, one of the things you spoke about was the difference in the bond, the type of...
The way the bricks are laid,
yes.
The original house itself, if you look...
Could you please use the microphone, sir? Thank you.
Right. If you look in the best example I have got is on section 4, page 9 of 10.
Page 9.
If you have a look towards the left of the line, you've got what is called a Flemish bond. Yeah, brick, half brick, brick, half brick. And to the right of the adjoining line, it's what they call a stretcher bond, which is just laid in a...
I do know about bonds.
Oh, right.
But I wanted to bring out that point. Yes, thank you very much
for
explaining it. No, thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or clarification? Thank you. If I can invite you to now turn off the microphone, sir, and return to your seat. Thank you. Is the applicant, Mr. Katra, present, or the agent, Mr. Wadia? No, thank you. No councillors. Colleagues, I open this one up for your consideration and discussion. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. Well, having just confirmed that point, maybe in the reason for refusal, I agree with all those elements, but it's also the construction details, because we can clearly see that they don't line up. They are jarring to the eye. It poses a stop. So in design terms, that's completely unacceptable. If we could just include that. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, would there be any objection to such an inclusion?
I think the important distinction to make here, there isn't a distinction to be made. There have been a number of issues cited in terms of the quality of the build of the extension. Ultimately, I believe there's two strands here. We've got the planning side and what we can make a decision on tonight, and we have the building control side of things. To that extent, when we were framing the refusal reason, we were conscious of illustrating that the quality of the build and the poor quality of the build was considered to have a detrimental impact on the appearance, on the character and the appearance of the area's special local character. So in that sense, it's a planning consideration in terms of the poor quality and the poor build of the extension. But in terms of the actual, in terms of issues such as gaps in the build, gaps under the fascias, dampness, other issues, it falls under the remit of building control and would be outside of our consideration.
Thank you. I do understand and accept that, and yes, I was equally horrified by where all the rats and squirrels and everything can get into the building and the damp. It's not that. It's this picture which the gentleman spoke to us. You've got Flemish bond, you've got stretcher bond.
If I may insist, is this not again an appropriate addition in here that we just include in there? The wording that you use, construction detail, which is quite broad but would cover the brick bond.
Yes, it's sort of
is that inappropriate?
Unmatching construction detail.
With our legal colleagues and come up with a wording which might be considered to be a planning matter, then we can add that in.
I mean, it would be the same if you had windows that weren't matching. You'd got one window here and then you'd got, what you do, you try and keep the eye going this way or going that way, don't you? That's the whole basis of design, basically.
The only reason I said that we should consult is because we wouldn't want to bring in matters which are covered by other legislation, building control and so on.
I'm not talking about how well it's built.
This is straightforward construction detail,
which is
the
design.
Yes, the design or design detail.
But the design, in planning terms, we usually mean how is this as a bulk of building or designed. Here we're saying, no, it's so jarring here.
I think in the reason after design we could put in brackets sort of details of brick bonding and etc.
Yes,
design, design detail.
Or
and use the materials.
Including,
let's not get into a committee about the use of words. However, I think we do need to include in there the issue again around the construction or design detail, which covers for us the meaning around the brick bonding.
And perhaps if legal can,
I just wanted to highlight, which is probably obvious to yourself as decision makers, is that the planning control is irrelevant. It should be disregarded. And with regards to the building, how it's appearing with the design, it's imperative that we link it to policy. So if we're linking it to the street scene, the character, with wording it around there, we should be able to be safe if it then becomes subject to an appeal. It's imperative that we link it to policy.
I think we can link it to policies that we've got in the local plan, especially as they've been strengthened, and also the fact that this is an area of special character where we would look to have very matching design, materials, etc. So hopefully that can be, covered in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duncan. Colleagues, Councillor Chandel.
Thank you, Chairman. I think with Mr. Kelly's explanation how the build quality just moves on to how we do as in planning, I think he's explained it very well for me. And with the addition to what Councillor Duncan has said, I will definitely second the officer's recommendation.
We haven't yet had a proposal. Are you proposing then? Sorry.
Did you not propose?
With my amendment, I propose
You will
it.
propose it. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
And then you are seconding
second
Councillor
it. Sorry,
Chandel. That's fine. I hadn't heard those magic words. That was all. So we had a proposal and a second. A show of hands, please, on this one. And that is unanimously agreed. The application is refused, subject to the minor amendment to the refusal reason covering the design detail / construction detail. Thank you. And that can be delegated to the head of planning to sort the wording out. Now turn to agenda item 8, the riding stables.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for demolition of the existing stables and the erection of some new cattery pens and the rebuilding of an office and store on the site. And members will note from the history section that a previous application on the site was refused, and the appeal on that was dismissed, and members have a copy of that decision within the addendum. The application that's before you is a substantial reduction on what was refused and dismissed, and your officers consider that in this particular case there's sufficient justification for the development in terms of replacing existing buildings on the site. There's a reduction by almost 50% in terms of what buildings have been demolished and what's being replaced. The use as a cattery obviously is not a conforming use within the Greenbelt. We have received justification for that from the applicants. I did in the addendum say that they should be discounted, but I have changed my mind on that because the use is not a conforming use, and I think it should stay within the report and be considered by members. The site was operating quite successfully as a riding school and livery with associated uses, and there was land leased from the council for the horses to graze on. Unfortunately, it would appear that the lease was not renewed, and therefore the business has had to reduce substantially because of that, and the site is underutilised in many ways because of that, and the use as a cattery. If you are going to have a cattery within an urban area, then this would probably be as good a site as you can get, because it is set some distance from adjoining residential properties. It is enclosed, and therefore noise and smells and so on are not likely to be, or there wouldn't be impact on adjoining residents from those. So we consider that the site is suitable for the proposed use, and we are recommending it. If I can just go to the plans, there is a locally listed building on the site, which is the farmhouse. The actual site of the buildings that are proposed is in this area here, so it's substantially removed. These are all existing buildings that surround the site, so you can see from that the existing buildings that were removed. And the existing buildings that have been removed are this office, store and stables here, and the replacement buildings here. This building is currently being constructed, and this is a off-the-peg cattery building. This is a site. These are the surrounding buildings, and the actual site of the cattery and is in this position. In this position here. So that's the office building that's been constructed, and then the cattery goes along in that direction there. So that's the surrounding buildings, and you can see from that the site is very much enclosed. These are going to be, the buildings that are proposed are going to be substantially lower than the existing buildings, even the single-storey elements. So it wouldn't be visible from anywhere, and therefore the openness of the Greenbelt is not an issue. So we are recommending approval.
Thank you very much. Before we open this one up, I have read the appeal decision which has been attached to the addendum, and I'm particularly drawn to paragraph 17, which recognises the argument about the loss of grazing land and the impact on the business, and the decision that the planning inspector reaches notwithstanding that evidence. He comes to the conclusion that this is an inappropriate use in the green belt and that very special circumstance does not exist. And the issue now is and the question I would ask of legal is, what rights does this planning committee have to overturn the planning inspector's decision on that very specific issue?
Thank you, Chairman. I would refer to the guidance in the National Planning Policy Framework, and Section 143 basically starts with identifying harm to the greenbelt with the proposed development, and the test that they've placed here is that no development should occur unless there's very special circumstances. And I have perused the exceptions, and I'm not finding an exception within Section 145 of the policy that does really give the authority to override. But depleting from that, you as decision makers, if you can identify very special circumstances from what's been proposed, you could, providing you do find reasons, you could depart from what the guidance is saying. Guidance is saying unless it's, let me refer to the specific one. So what I was thinking maybe was C, the extension or the alteration of the building, provided that it does not result in disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building. Well, it's not an extension and it's not an alteration of the building. Then I was thinking D, the replacement of a building, provided the new building is in the same use and does not materially larger than the one it replaces. It's not the same use. And then I was contemplating G, limited infill or the partial or completed redevelopment of previous developed land, whether redundant or continuing use, which would not have a greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing development, or not cause substantial harm to the openness of the greenbelt, where the development would reuse would reuse previously developed land and contribute to the meeting and identified affordable housing need within the area of the local planning authority. So I can't see anything there. However, if you as decision makers, this is it's guidance, but if you find exceptional, very special circumstances, you could depart from policy. But over to you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan.
Yes, thank you for that advice too. Well, commercial interests are not a reason for overriding greenbelt policy, as I think we all know. I found paragraph 5 of the inspector's report, which was on the previous development, which was considerably larger, I believe we were advised. He says that he observed at his site visit that the proposal includes the erection of a new building where there was previously none. That immediately starts to speak about impacting on the openness of the greenbelt. In this case, I believe the proposal is on the site of a building that is being demolished. So again, the openness of the greenbelt, which we've just been advised about, and which is very, very, very helpful, because that's what is the acid test. In conclusion, he says that it gives rise to a small loss of openness to the green belt. That's because it was being built on an area that had not been developed. So there would be a small loss of openness because of that. And so he says, having considered it all, etc., I conclude that they do not clearly outweigh the harm, because if you reduce openness, that's harm, however you call it. In this case, it's being rebuilt where there were buildings. So I think it is different, and I think in this case, because it is considerably less, and it actually increases openness I think, this development, because it's demolishing buildings that are already there, but putting up a smaller replacement building, if that's my correct understanding of it, if officers could just confirm that.
Before we do, I'd just like to say that I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And from my consideration of this, there appears to be the two issues. The one is whether or not the building itself is detrimental to the harm, and the other one is whether or not the proposed use of the building is detrimental to harm. And I would agree with you on the former case, that because it's a reduction in footprint, there is no detriment. What we have, though, appears to be a planning inspector's appeal decision that says the use of a cattery is detrimental, and it needs very special circumstance. And the circumstance that's been presented to the officer for the use as a cattery, the planning inspector concludes doesn't amount, my reading, doesn't amount to very special circumstance. And unless there is new information to us that provides additional information that shows why very special circumstance exists for the use, not the building, I am uncomfortable with our powers to overturn a planning inspector's decision. And that is where I need legal and planning officers to help me.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'd just like to make one point. It's just an observation in terms of the appeal decision. The one thing I would state is that the planning inspector, for me, the key determination in that appeal was with regards to the scale of development on the site. In terms of section 17, where he references the use of the cattery, I believe that may have been where the applicant was trying to justify the development at that time in terms of the scale of the development, and he was justifying that in terms of the cattery and in terms of the economic benefits for the owners. That's the only thing I would kind of add to that, in the sense that I believe that was likely to have been an argument that was put forward by the applicant to support the scale of the development at that time. What's not clear from this decision fully, without interrogating it, is whether or not that the use of the land or the use of the cattery in itself was a refusal reason, or the reason that the appeal was dismissed. As I said, I believe the primary function would have been the primary reason for the refusal would have been the scale of the development on the site. That's just all I'd add.
Taking up your point about the use, what was the paragraph that concerned you as chair, Councillor Edwards, about the use? Was it 17?
Paragraph 17. My issue is whether or not very special circumstances need for the use, the additional use in a green belt. If you bring in an additional use in a green belt, does it in itself need special circumstance? Does it need planning permission to change a use? If you don't change the building, does it need planning permission?
Well, actually, I think they had horses here. Now they have cats. They're considerably smaller. I think the impact is going to be a lot less, actually.
It may well be. For me, I'm unclear on our legal powers here. It is unclear on the position, both legally and from officers, and I believe that should be bottomed out properly to ensure that we are not inadvertently directly overturning a planning inspector's decision on the use issue.
Yeah. I agree with that. Sorry to interrupt. I agree with that, but he doesn't actually say that. What he says here is that the appellant has said that they need to provide an income because they've lost the grazing land. Whilst I have sympathy with the appellant's circumstances, I have very limited evidence relating to the past business or the appellant's plans for the future. So he's commenting on the commercial nature, not and saying that, you know, you can't give that as a reason for having development in the green belt. I can't take that into account. That's what he's saying. But he then goes on to say quite clearly, and he does acknowledge that the Dogs Trust at Fairfield is in green belt, isn't it? We all know it. We all drive past it, if not into it. The one thing that he does comment on at length and refers to in the report, as well as in his conclusion, is the openness of the green belt. That is always the key factor with green belt, because if you put in any development, and I mean even concreting over part of the green belt, that's development, can give rise to other things. That's a no-no as well. So, you know, I take your point that he seems to be saying a cattery is not suitable, but he's saying I'm not considering it as a commercial element because I'm not taking that into account. It doesn't matter whether it's commercially viable or not. That's not a matter I'm taking into account. It's the openness of the green belt. And I'm saying that I think that has been addressed by this development, smaller development.
I don't think we will argue at all on that point. Mine is a finer point of detail. I'm not even clear on the existing permitted use of the land, whether or not there is an actual change in use, and if there is a change of use, is that a separate consideration? I think it's unclear. I think it needs to be reworked a little bit further. We did have very special circumstance in. It was removed, and now it's been put back in, which shows that there is a lack of certainty in our decision making here. And I think that needs to be resolved first before we inadvertently make a decision that actually we might come to regret, because it's ultra vires. We don't have the powers to overturn a planning inspector's decision on a very narrow issue.
Well, the inspector's decision, that is a material consideration, and what I would highlight is that if the inspector's considered the application and has made a finding that it shouldn't be given planning permission, if those facts are the same facts that are before us today, then you would have to have good reasons to depart from that inspector's decision. The fundamental question I think needs to be explored is what has changed from that inspector's decision as to now desire giving planning permission or not. That needs to be explored if there's been any change of fact.
I mean, the change is the scale, which is the key issue. The other question is, though, is the use an issue at all? And that is not covered here.
He doesn't refer to that. That's not a major consideration. It's only the viability, the living of this person. He's saying, that's not down to me. I can't take that into account. That's not a planning matter, as we know.
I accept that, but my understanding is that if there is a change of use in a green belt, then we have to look at very special circumstances. And the very special circumstance that's being put forward here is the business. And the planning inspectors already says that's not relevant. Well, that's not important enough. And that is, for me, the issue. I think it would be a shame if we couldn't somehow go ahead and support this. My concern is that we need to do it appropriately. And at the moment, there isn't that clarity. I haven't heard from either legal or planning officers to say, no, use is not an issue here, forget about it. You don't need very special circumstance. It's just whether or not this is a bigger footprint or a smaller footprint. Or I've heard that, yes, you do need very special circumstance, in which case, what are they and how do they differ from the planning inspector who said, that doesn't amount to it, I'm sorry. So I would need to see what additional information has come forward, I would have thought. And I think we need to defer this to allow officers and legal time to resolve that issue. Councillor Chamdale.
Thank you, Chair. I'm confused because the weighting that we put on an inspector is huge, and decisions that we make. If it's in the same street, in the same road. Now, the question for me, exactly how everybody said it, is what are these very special circumstances? I understand the footprint has reduced quite greatly, 30-40%. I don't think it's quite 50, but it has. So the harm in terms of openness is not there. But I still want to know what the very special circumstances are. And I would not want to go without concrete grounds against the inspector's report. So that's my hang on it.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman, and then I'll come over to Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I propose that we defer to another meeting pending further clarification?
Thank you. Councillor Dillon?
I agree with you. It's quite confusing, but just like other members of the committee have said, the change in the scale of the scheme, the reduction has led to a reduction in the openness of the scheme. That's fine, and we've approved schemes like that in the green belt before. The change of use has to be a special circumstance, and commercial and interest is not a special circumstance. And that's fundamental to this planning application. It's a fresh planning application. appeal. But that is a consideration that we have to take. I don't want to refuse this, but as someone who supports the green belt, I can't support it either, because it's a change of use, and that is not within.
Would you be seconding then a deferment to allow this to be clarified?
No, I don't think we need to.
You don't?
I think we can refuse.
Can I just highlight something? In the MPPF, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 144 says, when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the greenbelt. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. So I think it doesn't give the considerations, it's vague, but I think what's pertinent is if the inspector has already decided on the facts, if they're the same facts today, then yeah.
They're small. Is this a view that we should be moving now to refusal, acceptance or deferment? And that, for me, are really the three outcomes we have here. Councillor Tuttle, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleagues on the table, I'm quite confused by this, but I don't want to refuse it, but I'll be happy to defer to get some more information so that we can give this due consideration.
So you're seconding it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been put and second. Please, if you don't mind, if we just take this through, if I can have a show of hands, please, on that one, on the deferment. 5, 6, 7, 8, that's unanimous. Then we defer it, please. We really want the issue here to be resolved is around, we recognise the building is an improvement. The issue is around use. Does that need to have very special circumstance? Does it not? Does this amount to very special circumstance? Does it not? What new has occurred since the planning inspector's decision back in last year? So what additional information can we consider that wasn't put before the planning inspector that might give us an opportunity to move forward, okay? And then hopefully...
And what's the use class?
What is the existing use class?
Because on page 59, or the fifth paragraph down, which the officers have reported, the framework indicates any harm to green, blah, 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 and then it actually encompasses everything we said. As such, weight should be given to very special circumstances to justify the proposed.
Right.
What are they?
That all needs to be resolved, and that has been deferred, and the officers will go away and sort that one out. I apologise that one has come this far. It's only a late reading of the appealing decision that has flagged up that concern in my mind. It's something ordinarily we would pick up a bit earlier. Okay, agenda item 9. Simpson Road, Harmondsworth Road West.
Thank you, Chairman. This is likely to be a regular occurrence. The 20-metre monopole and substantial number of equipment cabinets. This is a replacement of an existing monopole with 3 antennas, and so the proposal is for a 20-metre monopole and 8 equipment cabinets and 10 concrete bollards. The site is on the edge, although it is within a conservation area. It is on the edge, but it is within the conservation area, as that shows. There are 2 existing masts within very short distance of each other, and the proposal is to replace one of these with a higher mast. I can just go through the plans. This is the proposed mast, and I think that picture, and there's another one from a different direction, sums up the clutter element. You can see the substantial amount of street furniture and various poles and so on that is in that area. This will add considerably, not only particularly in terms of the equipment cabinets, and members know the size of the cabinets that are proposed, the highest being some 2.3 metres high, which is 7 feet in old money, and there's a considerable number at 1.8 metre and 2 metres high, so these are high and larger cabinets than that are on site. These are fairly small cabinets. These are 1,200 metres by 1 metre wide by 1.8 metres, so they're not large cabinets. The mast to be replaced is this one here, the nearest one to us, and I can go back to the previous photograph. There is a line of cabinets. I'm sorry that it's so far away, but there's a line of cabinets coming along down the verge here, and it is in essence the cabinets that are the big issue, rather than the monopole in itself. An increase in the height of the monopole, although it will be bulkier than the current monopole, may not be the major issue in this particular case, but the site is in the conservation area, and the number of cabinets and the amount of clutter that's in that area, and the addition of this would be, I think, unacceptable. So we are recommending refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you much. Councillor Chamdell, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with the officer's report, bar the part of the size design and the monopole. We've seen this. We welcome 5G, well, my kids do, but I think there's got to be a balance here. And we, as Mr. Harani said, this is going to be an ongoing thing. They really have to put it in a place where it fits in. And put in an additional 5 cabinets, 10 concrete bollards. I'm sorry, I don't go with that. I'm happy with the addendum sheet to remove the part about the monopole, and I would like to go with the officer's recommendation.
I think the monopole is the design of the monopole.
Yes, the size and
the size and sighting. So the size is still an issue. The height, notwithstanding the government's drive on 5G and 20-metre poles, it's the size that is still in there. You believe that shouldn't be there. Councillor Dillon and then Councillor Duncan, please.
I'm very happy to second it. I think we'll continue to refuse them because of the number of cabinets that are going to come up each time. Until government legislation tells us otherwise, we'll continue to refuse. So I'm happy to put their second.
There's a slight difference here. That Councillor Jamdal is saying actually he believes that the refusal reason against the size of the monopole should be removed, but the quantity, size, scale and sighting of the equipment cabinet should remain. So we're refusing the cabinets and the bollards, but not the pole per se, recognising the additional height is a necessary feature of 5G. That is what I believe was being
yes,
said.
Chairman, because I don't believe the size. I understand from 12.5 to 20 is considerable if it was horizontal, but vertical, I don't think that many people will see the difference in that.
I would tend to agree. For me, the furniture is the key element here.
Okay, Councillor Duncan.
Well, I do think that the height does have an impact, as we know from twin buildings. I would just like reference to its siting. So if we could say the proposed development by reason, etc., in this prominent public location, because it is a very prominent location at the division of 2 main roads, and virtually anybody coming from north, south, east and west is going to see it. So if that could go in, I know it's in the conservation area as well, but so there's good reason for this. It's not as if it's tucked away less obtrusively. Okay,
very slight difference of opinion emerging here. I've heard the mover and seconder was around actually just the cabinets. Here Councillor Duncan is saying actually no, the pole is also a key consideration. Do I have other views on that before we move to the vote? Councillor Tutwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got no issue with the size of the pole, but for me it is the number of cabinets and where they're situated. So I'm happy with the proposer and seconder.
Okay. So as proposed and seconded, which is agreeing with the officer's report and refusal recommendation, but deleting size, design and citing the proposed monopole. So it's the proposed development by reason of the quantity, size, scale and citing the equipment cabinets and concrete bollards in this prominent public location would create an unintrusive form of development. Okay? That is moved and seconded. Show of hands please on that. That's everybody. Thank you. Agenda item 10. '28 Oakdean Road.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the conversion of the existing building into 2-by-1-bed flats. Members may recall this site had been to committee a number of times in relation to extensions and possible new dwelling to the side, which was refused. The extensions were eventually approved and they are under construction currently. The proposal is thus the conversion to 2 one-bed flats. The flats comply in all respects with the council's and national standards in terms of their size. The amenity space complies with the council's requirements, and 2 parking spaces are provided to the front, which is acceptable for 2 one-bed flats. So the application is considered acceptable in all respects and is recommended for approval. If I can just show you the plans. That shows the site layout and the ground floor, which is a fairly large 1-bed flat, and then the upper floor. And the extensions, these extensions that are under construction were approved previously, and that's the site with the as I said, it has been to committee a number of times. Members may recall the site. So that's the building under construction, and your officers consider the scheme to be acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
With the additional
with the addendum.
refusal reason, approval reason, condition.
Yeah.
Okay. Colleagues, Councillor
Unlike the Fairfield Road one, this one it's hard to argue with the officer's recommendations. It's fully compliant. Can't seem to find any reasons why there would be any reason to overturn the officer's recommendation. So I'd be happy to move it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topwell?
Yeah, likewise, I'll be happy to second that.
Thank you. Show of hands, please, on this one. Everybody, thank you. Number 11.
Very quickly, Chairman. This is a scheme which was refused. This relates to 1376 Uxbridge Road, change of use from retail to a taxi control office. It was a scheme which we refused back in 2014, went to appeal and was approved, and obviously the works haven't been carried out, so it is a renewal of that permission in a way, although the permission has expired. There are no changes to the circumstances, and therefore we are recommending approval with the same conditions that were put on by the inspector. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chandal?
Thank you, Chairman. Powers greater than ours have said yes, so I think we'll have to go with it. I'll go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan?
Just ask about hours of operation, because sometimes taxis work late at night and there's residential accommodation above to the side, and we've also approved some on the vacant site to the west of it as well. So I think if they're having phone calls and bells ringing at all hours of the night, people are going to be... I know they're on the Uxbridge Road, but it's very, intrusive.
Mr. Kelly, if you could answer that one. Yeah, this is an issue, obviously, that officers were considering on the application. The rationale behind the conditions that have been chosen are included in the report. Is essentially that the conditions reflect the conditions that were applied by the planning inspectorate in the previous approval. So officers would be concerned that if we were to impose any additional conditions now on this consent, that we'd have a very poor chance of success on appeal, essentially, if we were challenged.
Councillor, could I bring in Councillor Brightman, please? Thank you. Councillor Brightman?
I noticed that it doesn't mention anything about the taxis parking there, and I've been reliably informed that the cabs already, because this is retrospective, isn't it? There are already cabs parking up, making congestion in an area where there is already a residence parking problem.
Okay, so Councillor Duncan, I'll bring you back in there.
I was just going to ask further to Mr. Kelly's observations about, we can't start imposing conditions, but certainly we've got, where there was a motor showroom next door, we've now granted permission for several flats, and I believe that the flats above what were a parade of shops, one of them has been completely turned into residential, and the first floors are now all residential, whereas they weren't all before. I think a couple of them were offices. So depending on when the decision was made, we could argue that there are different circumstances at this time, which mean there are residents whose interests we should protect, whereas they weren't existing at the time the inspector made his or her decision. If I could just ask if that could be looked into, please.
Point well made. Would that allow us to bring forward some protection to residential amenity?
I suppose firstly in terms of the subject property, I'll just quote a line out of the appeal decision. The inspector said that the property is a two-storey building with a small vacant former shop at ground floor and a flat above. So it does appear there was a flat above on the subject site. I do take your point though in terms of if circumstances have changed on adjoining sites or properties.
There's now more people to be affected.
I think Councillor Duncan talked about possible conditions relating to hours of use, and that might be difficult for a taxi control office because, as we all know, they normally operate on a 24-hour basis. We could look at conditions relating to which we used to put on previously on taxi offices, relating to no visits from cab drivers and so on, but I think it'd be difficult for us to control parking on the road because it's a public highway and we can't really impose conditions on the public highway. So we could look at drivers not being able to visit and no facilities being provided for them on the site. But in terms of the hours of use, it may well be difficult because as generally these are 24-hour operations.
I only raise this point.
Could I just, bring in Councillor Tuckwell, he's indicated, and then I'll come back.
On the issue of cars, in page 97 it says that the cars would not be stationed at the site.
Thank you.
So whether that can be included.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon, then Councillor Duncan.
Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. Pinkwell is now suffering from problems that are from the PSPO in Hillingdon now regarding cabs, where they have all moved on into Pinkwell now parking within Pinkwell, with the ward I represent. And you now have cab drivers sitting there with no facilities or using very few facilities and basically urinating, going to the bathroom and creating litter and parking issues in that ward. And it's the same with a cab. If you've got a central hub for a cab and they can park there, at least they can go to the bathroom or dispose of rubbish, etc. That is an advantage, as it is a disadvantage for congestion. So sometimes you've got to be careful what you're wishing for, I think. Okay.
Before us, this issue, and I'm going to press, there have been a change in circumstances, it appears to me, since the appeal inspector with regards to the development nearly next door. There is a substation, electrical substation, but there's also development within that small parade itself that may not have been existing at times, and so I would not be uncomfortable if members pushed for some restriction on calling visitors to the premise by customers outside of normal sort of nighttime hours. So you prevented that. That seems to me reasonable. But what I'd like to do is bring this issue to a head with a decision one way or t'other now, please. Councillor Duncan.
Could I just say that members may recall the application for a taxi office on the parade of shops leading up to Hayes Station. And that's on that tiny piece, quite separate. And the people in the block of flats, you know, huge block of flats, isn't there? I forget what it's called now, that block, but at the Hayes Station development, who complained bitterly about the noise and disturbance and some of the things that Councillor Dillon has referred to. So even though that was separate from them, it did still have an impact. So where there are residents, I mean, it is a matter for us as members of the committee to consider those issues and to consider whether we feel the situation is different, and going on our knowledge of other circumstances that we've heard about from Councillor Dillon and from our own knowledge of other planning applications, whether we think that is something we should consider.
Okay. Councillor Chandel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I think we need to review when such applications come up as what the situation is now. The inspector made his decision quite clearly. It's different now, and if we have got residents there, additional residents, I think it's fair and just if we do put a condition in. I don't think that it's unreasonable, and I'm sure if an inspector looked at that, he would agree as well that if the surrounding has changed, we've got more residents, limited parking, then we should have some sort of restriction which sure their lives are not affected as such.
Okay, would somebody then please try and help me move this along, recognising the comments that have been made around residential amenity. Councillor Duncan.
I would propose that we do limit the hours of operation to something reasonable to that business, but also taking on board the fact that it is already existing, as Councillor Brighton has pointed out. We need to put something in place to address what has already become an existing problem because they're already there. So maybe that if they're blocking access, there needs to be some restriction on that.
I just need to bring Mr. Kelly in on the access bit. Thank you.
Well, actually, what I was going to say is I just had a look before I came to the committee this evening. I've seen that there is no active planning enforcement investigation at the moment on the site. So in terms of the existing use, we haven't received any complaints through the council yet in terms of, or through planning at least, regarding the use.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. Bearing in mind there seems to be a debate, shall we say, in terms of what the current situation is in terms of residential nature of the line of houses. Can I suggest that we actually, well, I don't want to say defer it, well, it's my catchphrase tonight, well, I'm not going to say a site visit either, but I honestly think we don't know what the current situation is, so to be honest, I'd be inclined to say we turn it down.
Right, now we've got
I'm not proposing
three
that,
options
I'm just throwing
before
it
us.
out
This
there.
is really unhelpful, and this meeting tonight is getting away from me as chairman. What we have is the officer's recommendation of approval because the actual planning inspectors tied our hands to approve it. So to turn it down, I think, would be very difficult. However, because there has been some change in the environment, the suggestion is we should put some control over it to limit disturbance of residents. The issue is, do you go with the officer's report or do you add an additional condition in that limits the use and impact on residents? That's the issue before you, and I need somebody now to take this forward one way or t'other. Councillor Chamdal.
Thank you, Chairman. You said it better than I would have, but I would go with that. And I would ask the officers what kind of condition can we add, which is a norm in this situation. But I would move with the officer's recommendation with the addition of a condition regards operating times.
On this one, I would ask that it comes back to myself and the lead, just to clarify that we're covering it off appropriately. Councillor Tuckwell?
Yeah, I would happily second that, what Councillor Chamdale has.
Thank you very much. Show of hands now, please. That's everybody. Thank you.
I just clarify two things.
You
One, you wish condition relating to the hours of use?
A condition relating to limiting the impact on residents nearby, and that is now for officers to look at the existing new circumstance and say it may just be hours, it may be hours and control of parking, it may be both, it could be neither. But it needs to come back to myself and the Labour League.
To be agreed with you and
yes, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We go to agenda 12. This is 12 and 12A Broadway Parade, and hopefully this one's not as contentious.
Hopefully not. Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the change of use of part of a retail shop to a beauty treatment use, which is a use class sui generis. The shop has been split into 2 units, and one half will remain as a retail unit, and the other would be the beauty treatment. Works have already appeared to have been carried out, and our news is the existing retail use which remains, and then the adjoining in black is the nail stroke beauty treatment bar, and your officers consider that the percentage of retail use which is still within this parade is still acceptable and therefore complies with the council's policies, and therefore we're accepting that it is acceptable in this location. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Chandal.
Thank you, Chairman. I know the area well, very well. I think it's to really promote business. It's tough in high streets, and well-managed properties to split into 2, done well and managed well. I think I support that wholly to make sure our high streets survive. So I'm going with officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ahmed Bolana.
Thank you, Chairman. I couldn't agree more, and I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Show of hands, please. Everybody, thank you. Agenda item 13.
Thank you, Chairman.
An unusual one.
Unusual application, as you say. This is an application for the siting of a double-decker bus on the school grounds for use as a library. And the site, if I can just point it out, is in this position here, where this building exists, and it's next to it in this position here. So if I can just go to the actual, unfortunately that plan isn't the best, but that's where it is located, and these are the photographs or the plans that have been submitted. That shows it in position, and as you know, it is difficult to get photographs of schools for good reason, but that is the site in there. It is shielded to some extent by landscaping on the frontage, the tree there, and so we consider it to be acceptable in visual terms. There is an addendum on this which recommends a couple of conditions relating to disabled access, and with that we are recommending approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Colleagues, I open this one up for discussion. Councillor Chandal.
Thank you, Chairman. On the face of it, when I first looked at it, I thought, wow, what a good idea to get kids into libraries and start reading. My only concern is about the accessibility for disabled or not as abled. And going off, I don't know what page this is, because it's marked, I don't know what page this is. 112, 13, 14, 15, 117. The officer's report, access officer's report, he said he has no accessibility concerns. I just wonder, how is somebody in a wheelchair going to go into the actual bus and then access the top floor as well? So surely the thing is, why shouldn't they be able to access the top floor as well? So it's a library as a whole. I think I would seek other people's views on that.
It is a point made. I mean, I understand our responsibility is around reasonableness here, and it is for the committee to conclude whether or not reasonable measures can be drawn to ensure access. The additional proposed condition here, prior to the commencement of the development, may go some way to assuage concerns in that regard. Councillor Bira, were you indicating? No. Thank you. Councillor Dillon, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I take the point about access to the first floor, sorry. But it's one of those questions of, in planning terms, on balance. Yeah, I'm not a lover of that term either. But on balance, it's a library, encourages use, children to read. Those with who are less abled can still use the ground floor, and you've got to look at it on balance. It's a decent application and addresses issues of learning, so I've got no problem with it.
Thank you. Any other views? Councillor Ahmed Walana?
I think it's a reasonable application, and I'm happy to second, but it could be a safety issue as well. Cannot get access to all over, so it could be the reason. It's not like if you're limiting access to all over in the library. It just could be a safety measure.
Let me just ask whether or not the safety issue is a matter here, or is that for other considerations?
It is outside of planning. Sorry, it is outside of planning consideration. We should. I mean, there is a requirement to provide access. The access that can be provided is going to be provided on this. There are conditions which are recommended to make sure that is provided. Obviously, it won't be to the full building, as it were, but members do have to weigh that against the fact that there is an existing library within the existing school buildings, which is fully accessible as well.
Councillor Tuckwell, you indicated?
Yeah, it's a really creative scheme, and for me, I think, when we talk about, access to the bus and the upper levels, I think, it says here is to ensure the bus library is fully inclusive to people with disabilities, and I just can't see how, someone who's lesser abled, is going to be always wondering what is on that top deck, and they're not going to be able to have access to it. So I get the point that it's on balance. I just wonder if there's anything we can tease out of that to sort of get some firmer understanding about how that's actually going to work.
Councillor Duncan?
Yeah. I think it's a shame. This is a one form of entry school, so it's a small school, and it's a shame that they've now got a fully accessible library, and it's going to be replaced with something that isn't. And also, when we look at the site plan, there's very, very limited green area around this school. It has very limited sort of playing field area. I know it's in the sort of centre of Uxbridge, so it's in a town centre location, but it seems a shame that it's going to lose some of that as well. So an area that, could be used for play and everything is going to be lost. I don't know what it does to the requirements for playing field, playground space, but I think it may be fairly near the minimum already. I don't know.
Let's ask a question directly of officers. Does this application have any impact on the play space available to the children, such that it's detrimental or below standard?
Again, that is outside of our remit in a way, because there is specific requirements set out within other regulations which require sort of minimum play space, and that needs to be adhered to regardless of whether planning permission is granted or not. So if this takes up space, then they would still need to comply with those requirements of providing minimum play space, given the size of and the number of pupils that are there. The second issue, I think, is that Councillor Duncan did say that this was a replacement facility it isn't. It's an additional facility. The library within the school buildings is to be retained.
I'll bring in Mr. Kelly on that point.
Yes, I think it's important to stress that in terms of the fact that we're looking at additional facilities here. Now, clearly, in terms of the wording of the first condition in particular of the addendum, the wording has been constructed in this way. Officers are quite keen that the development and that the bus will afford all opportunities to people with disabilities. What we're potentially looking at in terms of the layout may be an arrangement whereby, and we'll be able to control this through the condition, whereby the library or the book facilities would be at the lower level, and there would be seating arrangements for children that may have disabilities that would be able to enjoy the facilities of the library on the lower deck. It may be that we try to tease something like that out through the condition in terms of the details that we'd look to get submitted.
Thank you. Can I just make an observation before I bring you in, and I will? There is nothing within this conditions, though, that would prevent the school changing its mind and replacing the existing library with the bus if they found they were under pressure for space elsewhere. And if the view of the committee is that this is a useful additional library space, but is not a replacement library space, then there should be a condition to protect that view. Kerry, if I
Yes. What I would highlight here is that I think with Councillor Tuckwell and Councillor Chamdal touching on the issue is that Section 149 of the Equality Act, that's the public sector equality duty, and there is a duty on the local planning authority to eliminate discrimination. So one of the protected characteristics is disability, and it should be explored if reasonable adjustment could be made with this development. So I think in order for you all to make your decision, maybe it could be the developers could be maybe questioned as to what they could offer any disabled user, and if they can, that would be helpful in your decision making. If they can't, then it allows you to show that you've considered it and then you've made a decision thereafter. If it's not on the papers, then I guess that you're struggling to have regard to it. So that's what I would highlight, the public sector equality duty. That's probably what's troubling yourself in making your decision.
Thank you. And I do believe the conditions that have been put in on the addendum begin to address our public our duty in that regard. Councillor Chamdal.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a shame that we haven't got the full plans, the internal layouts of the bus. It's in the addendum that prior to commencement of development, but I think with a condition that they have to keep a library within the school, and this bus is an additional feature, then I'm slightly more comfortable, because then it just means, especially children, you go home and say, look, I can go to the top deck because I'm disabled. So at least they can use the main library, they can use the ground floor of the bus. It just means that the top of the bus they can't use. Maybe the school can use that as a stock room, I don't know, whatever. So it means everybody can access the bottom deck and the main library in the school. So I'll be comfortable to go with then the officer's recommendation with those additions of conditions.
Are you so moving? Are you so moving?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor I mean, it's all on green area, and I know this other area here, I think is hard surface, isn't it? At the front, that's hard surface. So do they have access to any green space at all? Because I know that the school might say, oh, well, they've got all this, but, for little children to play safely, I think they need to have access to some grassed areas.
The buildings to be sited there. So you have this space along the frontage here, which is all playground.
Yeah, a lot of it's hard surface, though, I think, isn't it?
All is. This isn't.
This is artificial, isn't it?
AstroTurf.
All right. They hoover it then, not know it. Yeah.
Councillor Tarkwell.
So you can see this is the thing that they've got there.
Yeah.
Councillor Tarkwell.
Yeah, thanks for the various explanations. I think for me it's around how do we as a committee get confirmation or confidence that the developer is fulfilling their responsibilities under the Equalities Act in making that reasonable adjustment? And does that satisfy our requirements in granting this application? I'm desperate to grant it because I think it's a great idea, but I've got this hang up with not having access to the top deck. But if that's covered off, you know, through the Equalities Act and having demonstrated a reasonable adjustment is made, then I'd be happy with that.
I would suggest our access officer is a strong champion of people with limited mobility, and I would be comfortable with his keen eye over it, us having raised the issue clearly with him and our concerns. If somebody wished to second.
Second, subject to additional conditions.
Thank you very much. So we're asking for an additional condition to be put in there to ensure that this bus is a supplementary library and the existing library is retained for as long as this bus is on site.
Well, as long as there is a school there.
I would have to question whether or not we can constrain them to that extent.
It'll relate to the development.
Thank you. Okay. That's been moved and seconded. A show of hands, please, on that one. That's everybody. Thank you. That comes to the end of part one. Now turn to part two.